In a brutal clash between the White Tower's elite mages and a united demonic force, humanity stood on the edge of extinction. Leading the invasion was the High Priest of Extinction, commanding an army powerful enough to threaten the entire world. Standing against them was Oscar Sage, a level 9 mage and master of the White Tower. Fighting alongside his disciples, Oscar managed to stop the invasion and defeat the enemy. But victory came at a terrible cost. A massive hole pierced through his chest as blood slowly spread beneath him. With what little strength he had left, Oscar cast one final detection spell, desperately searching for any remaining signs of life. Nothing. No response. No survivors nearby. Everyone was gone. He was completely alone, and he wouldn't be alive for much longer. At that moment, Edna Solar appeared. The last dragon. The observer of history. She had come to assess the damage left behind by the war. According to her report, 132 level 6 mages, 19 level 7 mages, and 2 level 8 mages had fallen in battle. The White Tower had been reduced to ruins, and countless years of magical research had been lost forever. But there was one piece of good news. Imperial forces had arrived earlier than expected and managed to rescue a handful of survivors, including Oscar Sage's personal disciples. Hearing that, Oscar finally felt relieved. With his final breath, he asked Edna Solar to protect them. Because he trusted her, the dragon lowered her head in agreement. Amused by the sight, Oscar joked about a dragon being bound to a human's request. Edna Solar simply replied that he had earned that right. At exactly 3:47 p.m. on April 28th, Oscar Sage passed away. History would remember him as one of the greatest mages to ever live. Yet despite all his accomplishments, he died with a single regret. He never believed he had been a good leader for his people. If he were ever given another chance, he swore he would live differently. He would live selfishly for the sake of his people. A foolish wish. An impossible wish. And yet, against all logic, it came true. 20 years later, Oscar Sage opened his eyes. But he wasn't in his own body. A falling leaf brushed against his skin, causing him to jolt upright. The sudden movement sent his hand flying straight into the face of the man beside him. Water splashed everywhere. Frank, his caretaker, immediately started yelling. After taking care of him all this time, this was the thanks he got? All he wanted to do was change a towel. He complained that Oscar Crushing's reckless sleeping habits would be the death of him and that a little gratitude wouldn't hurt. But Oscar Sage barely heard a word. His mind was racing. Why was he alive? The last thing he remembered was dying after being skewered by the High Priest of Extinction. Before he could process what was happening, the door suddenly burst open. Elder Maxim stormed inside without even bothering to knock. Frank tried to calm him down, but Elder Maxim wasn't interested in listening. He loudly declared that it was finally time to turn Oscar Crucian into a proper human being before calling him completely pathetic. Still trying to understand the situation, Oscar Sage asked the question that mattered most. How was he alive? Elder Maxim laughed. To him, it sounded like Oscar Crucian had only just realized he was the kind of cockroach that somehow always found a way to survive. Ignoring the insult, Oscar Sage's attention shifted toward their robes. And the moment he saw them, he realized something was very wrong. The robes they were wearing immediately caught Oscar Sage's attention. These were White Tower mage robes. He demanded an explanation. Unfortunately, that was the worst thing he could have said. Elder Maxim's face instantly darkened with rage. Without warning, he raised his hand, preparing to slap Oscar Crucian so hard he would see next week before the rest of the world did. Acting on pure instinct, Oscar Sage cast a windshield spell. Even in his weakened state, he was confident the barrier would shatter Elder Maxim's wrist before the slap could land. But the moment the spell formed, something was wrong. The magical barrier flickered, then vanished. It collapsed before Elder Maxim's hand even reached it. Oscar Sage's heart sank. His magic was weak. Way too weak. Still, the incomplete spell was enough to make Elder Maxim stop. To Oscar's surprise, the old mage actually looked pleased. He remarked that Oscar Crucian hadn't been completely lazy after all. For now, he would postpone punishment for embezzling research funds. After delivering that warning, Elder Maxim turned around and stormed out of the room. Frank, who was still soaked from earlier, couldn't believe what had just happened. If Oscar Crucian had said one more wrong thing, he would have been flattened. But Oscar Sage wasn't paying attention. His mind was focused on something far more important. What happened to his magic? After inspecting himself, he quickly found the problem. His mana circuits were in terrible condition. His mana reserves were pathetic. Even the purity of his mana was garbage. Nothing about this body resembled the power he once possessed. Needing answers, he asked Frank what day it was. Annoyed, Frank replied that it was September 21st. Oscar Sage froze. September 21st? That meant he had been unconscious for 5 entire months. But Frank immediately corrected him. No, he had only been asleep for one day. Somehow, that answer was even worse. Trying to confirm his suspicions, Oscar ordered Frank to summon Lloyd Schultz. And if Lloyd wasn't available, then bring healer Shasha instead. Frank stared at him like he had gone insane. Apparently, those names belonged to mages whose stories were already part of history. Lloyd Schultz had left the White Tower long ago and joined the Red Tower. As for the missing spell books, he was blamed for losing them. Only Shasha remained, and she was now the White Tower master. Oscar Sage immediately rejected everything he had just heard. There was no way any of that could be true. Yet Frank sounded completely sincere. For the first time, doubt crept into Oscar's mind. He demanded an explanation. How could Shasha possibly be the White Tower master? When he died, she had only been 5 years old. Frank sighed before correcting him again. Shasha wasn't 5 anymore. She was 25. And at that moment, reality finally hit him. Oscar Sage slowly looked toward the nearby window. A stranger stared back. The reflection wasn't his own. The body wasn't his own. He wasn't Oscar Sage anymore. He had somehow been thrown 20 years into the future. And during those 20 years, the world had completely transformed. Electricity, automobiles, advanced magic engineering. Civilization had advanced far beyond anything he remembered. It was the kind of future his old comrades would have been amazed to see. Humanity had survived. And from the ashes of despair, something extraordinary had been built. After calming himself down, Oscar began investigating the body he now occupied. Its owner was Oscar Crucian, 20 years old, a fallen noble's son, accepted into the White Tower at the age of 10. A level 1 mage with decent looks, but absolutely terrible magical talent. According to Frank, Oscar Crucian had recently embezzled funds to purchase an illegal elixir. His goal was simple: increase his mana. Unfortunately, the experiment ended in disaster. The moment he drank it, he collapsed. Frank insisted he had only been unconscious for a day, but based on the amount consumed, Oscar Sage believed the young man should have died on the spot. Curious, he examined the body more carefully, and what he found was strange. Extremely strange. Despite being only a level 1 mage, Oscar Crucian possessed an abnormally large amount of pure, unrefined mana, far more than someone at his level should ever have. Then something even stranger happened. Deep inside his chest, a black substance suddenly appeared. The disgusting sludge slowly crawled through his body. It moved down his arm, across his hand, and finally, a drop of black gunk fell from his fingertip. The moment the black substance touched the floor, it let out a faint hissing sound. Oscar Sage's eyes narrowed. It was poison, and suddenly, everything made sense. The illegal elixir had been real. It had worked. The problem was that it had also been laced with poison. Oscar Crucian hadn't died from mana overload. He had been murdered. Even worse, the amount of poison used was absurdly high. Far too much for a low-level mage. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted Oscar Crucian dead, and they wanted to make absolutely sure he stayed that way. Oscar Sage didn't know who was behind it. He didn't know why they targeted him. But one thing was certain. He had been given the second chance he once begged for. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. He would live selfishly for his people, just as he had promised before his death. At the same time, he owed the original owner of this body a debt he intended to repay with interest. And that interest was called vengeance. Meanwhile, trouble was already brewing elsewhere. Part of the city had been destroyed by a rogue mage, throwing the Gordon family into chaos. The head of the Gordon family was furious. He shouted at one of his servants, demanding to know who had attacked his store. The servant hesitated before finally revealing the culprit: Oscar Crucian. The boss immediately dismissed the idea. There was no way a pathetic level 1 mage could defeat his guards. It was impossible, unless the elixir had actually worked. The servant nervously pointed out another problem. If the White Tower discovered what happened, they would both be finished. But surprisingly, the boss wasn't worried. He had seen the poison ring worn by the person who ordered Oscar Crucian's death, and that person was a White Tower mage. In other words, they had powerful allies. Then both men suddenly froze. A cold silence filled the room. Standing right in front of them was Oscar Sage. He had heard everything. Using the lingering scent left behind on the elixir bottle, he had traced it directly to this location. Now that he knew more about the situation, Oscar realized the conspiracy ran far deeper than he originally thought. But that only made him more determined to uncover the truth. The boss quickly recovered and tried to assert control. He demanded to know whether Oscar Sage was responsible for destroying his store. Oscar didn't even bother denying it. He calmly admitted everything. Then, with complete confidence, he told them to continue their conversation. After all, he was very interested in hearing the rest. The boss's face twisted with rage. Any thoughts of letting Oscar leave disappeared instantly. He barked an order to his subordinate. Kill him. The acting head grinned and rushed forward without hesitation. Oscar Sage casually raised one hand. Wind cutter. A razor-sharp blade of compressed air shot forward. In an instant, it sliced cleanly across the man's throat. The attacker collapsed before he even understood what happened. As the body hit the floor, Oscar was reminded of the day he killed the High Priest of Extinction. For a brief moment, old memories resurfaced. Then reality returned. The boss had completely lost his composure. Panicking, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. Oddly enough, Oscar looked more curious than concerned. This was his first time seeing such a weapon. A tiny device capable of producing devastating force without using a single trace of mana. Fascinating. He cast Wind Shield. The incoming bullet suddenly stopped in midair. The boss's eyes widened in disbelief. Then Oscar flicked his finger. The flow of wind reversed. The bullet spun around and shot back toward its owner. Several rounds tore through the boss's body. He collapsed instantly. As the man's life faded away, Oscar calmly informed him that nobody was coming to help. Because from the very beginning, no sound had been allowed to escape the room. The boss stared at Oscar Sage in disbelief. How could a level 1 mage cast a silent spell? Oscar calmly corrected him. It wasn't a silent spell. It was soundbind. Unlike a silent spell, soundbind didn't erase sound. It simply prevented sound from escaping the area. With the explanation out of the way, Oscar got straight to the point. He wanted answers. Who ordered the assassination? The boss clenched his jaw and refused to speak. Oscar responded with a brutal kick that sent him crashing across the floor. Looking down at the injured man, Oscar realized something. He valued his pride more than his pain. Unfortunately for him, that wasn't going to save his life. Oscar raised his hand and infused the man's body with wind mana. Tiny blades of compressed wind formed inside him, slicing through his flesh from within. The boss immediately collapsed, screaming in agony as invisible blades tore him apart. The torture didn't last long. Eventually, he broke. Begging for mercy, he promised to tell Oscar everything. Satisfied, Oscar released the spell. The boss confessed that a hooded man named Neil Breen had approached them with the illegal elixir and a large sum of money. Their only job was to sell it to Oscar Crucian at an unbelievably cheap price. They accepted because refusing wasn't an option. According to the boss, Neil Breen wore a White Tower ring. But Oscar wasn't convinced. That sounded more like someone trying to frame the White Tower than an actual member. Instead of focusing on appearances, Oscar asked something unexpected. What did he smell like? The boss blinked before answering. A crisp, minty scent. It was so distinct that he would never forget it. Oscar silently memorized the detail. It might become important later. His next question was even more interesting. After poisoning a White Tower mage, how exactly were they planning to avoid the consequences? The boss simply shrugged. The White Tower was currently too busy dealing with its withdrawal from the 4 main towers. They barely had time to investigate crimes like this. That immediately caught Oscar's attention. He demanded more information. The boss looked confused. How could someone from the White Tower not know something so basic? Thinking quickly, Oscar blamed it on memory loss caused by the elixir. The excuse was believable enough. The boss handed over several documents explaining the current state of the world. Oscar quickly flipped through them. One page stood out immediately. April 28th had officially been declared White Knight Day, a holiday honoring Oscar Sage's sacrifice and the defeat of the High Priest of Extinction. As a reward for their victory, the Emperor granted the White Tower a 30-year tax exemption. It should have been the beginning of a golden age. Instead, the documents painted a completely different picture. Even after 20 years, the White Tower had never truly recovered from the war. In fact, it had produced the worst results among the 4 main towers the previous year. Oscar couldn't believe what he was reading. Before his death, he had personally entrusted Edna Solar with documents that were supposed to prevent exactly this outcome. So what went wrong? Oscar silently made a mental note to investigate later. He turned to the final pages. They listed the businesses operated by each of the 4 main towers. Curious, Oscar asked the boss to explain them. The boss happily obliged. The Yellow Tower of the East mastered lightning magic and led the magic engineering revolution. They created inventions like magical street lamps and even vehicles. The Blue Tower of the South dominated the potion industry while expanding into agriculture and clean water distribution. The Red Tower, based in the desert, worked alongside the military and specialized in monster subjugation. Oscar nodded. Those all made perfect sense. Then he asked about the White Tower. The boss answered without hesitation. They deliver mail. Oscar froze. The once great White Tower, the tower that had stood at the forefront of magical research, had become a postal service. Their wind riders now flew around delivering letters like carrier birds. Oscar Sage was completely speechless. The boss tried to defend the White Tower's new role. Their Wind Riders could travel faster and more safely than anyone else, giving them a huge advantage in logistics. But to Oscar Sage, it was nothing short of disgraceful. The White Tower had once symbolized freedom. Like dragons soaring across the sky, its mages were pioneers who pushed magic beyond its limits. Now, they were glorified delivery workers. Oscar could barely believe it. He demanded to know who had approved such a humiliating direction for the tower. The answer hit him harder than any attack. Shasha, his own disciple, the current White Tower master. For a moment, Oscar was speechless. He didn't know which hurt more, seeing his life's legacy reduced to this, or realizing he had personally trained the one responsible. Pushing aside his disappointment, Oscar shifted the conversation. He asked about the Blue Tower's unusual businesses. Selling water? Managing agriculture? How did that even make sense? The boss explained that the Blue Tower used magic to control rainfall in drought-stricken regions. They also purified water and sold it as a luxury product. According to him, wealthy nobles couldn't get enough of it. Oscar found the idea ridiculous. Water was free. People could dig wells. Who would actually pay premium prices just to drink purified water? Apparently, 20 years had changed more than just magic. It had changed people's priorities too. By now, the truth was impossible to ignore. While the other towers had expanded into powerful industries and built enormous empires, the White Tower had been left struggling just to survive. And with the White Night Festival only 7 months away, this might be their final chance to prove they still deserve their place among the 4 main towers. The shop owner lay trembling on the floor. Blood continued to pour from his wounds. His body had gone cold. Death was quickly approaching. Oscar Sage paused. The man had answered every question. Did that earn him a second chance? Before making his decision, Oscar picked up the shop's ledger. As he turned the pages, his expression grew colder. Arson, assault, illegal loans, extortion, contract killings. Every crime the man had ever committed had been carefully recorded in black ink. There wasn't a shred of innocence to be found. Closing the ledger, Oscar made his choice. Without saying another word, he walked to the edge of the building and jumped, leaving the man behind to face the consequences of his own actions. Perhaps, if there was justice in the next life, he would return as a better person. Later that night, Oscar Sage returned to the White Tower. His body felt completely drained. Casting only a handful of basic spells had exhausted him, as if he had run an entire marathon. It was both embarrassing and deeply concerning. If this body struggled with low-level magic, how could it ever withstand the Wind Archive magic that had made him legendary? He decided to test it anyway. Nothing happened. The spell disappeared the instant he cast it. No effect. No response. It simply failed. Oscar frowned. Clearly, he needed to understand this body before attempting anything more. His first step was a complete body scan. While the spell analyzed his condition, he picked up Oscar Crucian's profile book. If he wanted to survive in this new life, he first needed to understand the life he had inherited. The records revealed that Oscar Crucian had once been the heir of Count Crucian. He was also the sole survivor of a devastating fire that destroyed his family's mansion. From an early age, he had been praised as a once-in-a-generation genius. At the Empire Academy, he earned the highest grades. He even published a groundbreaking thesis that attracted attention from every major faction. Everyone wanted to recruit him. Everyone believed he had a brilliant future ahead of him. But then, everything came to a sudden halt. Despite all his intelligence, despite all his talent, Oscar Crucian never advanced beyond level 1. Oscar Sage soon discovered the truth. Oscar Crucian had been diagnosed with mana deficiency syndrome. At first, everything seemed to make sense. The boy had extraordinary intelligence, but no way to turn that talent into real power. A brilliant mind trapped inside a broken body. Then the results of the body scan appeared. Oscar's expression immediately changed. The diagnosis was wrong. This wasn't mana deficiency syndrome at all. Someone had deliberately sealed Oscar Crucian's mana circuits. And that's the end of today's Manhwa Recap. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more recaps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.